In the heart of a dense and ancient forest, nestled far from the hum of modern life, lies a place known only to a few, Forgotten Hollow. The name itself seems to whisper caution, as though the wind carries secrets too dangerous to be spoken aloud. This hidden valley, shrouded in mist and tangled undergrowth, has long been avoided by the locals. Old legends speak of strange sounds drifting through the trees, voices carried on the breeze that vanish when approached. Our story begins with Emma Carlyle, a young woman drawn to the mysteries of the unknown. An avid explorer and amateur historian, Emma had stumbled across a weathered map in her late grandfather's attic, marked with the cryptic words, "Forgotten Hollow, enter at your own peril." Curiosity quickly overwhelmed caution. Emma packed her bag, eager to uncover the truth behind the eerie tales whispered over decades. The journey was not easy. As Emma ventured deeper into the forest, the familiar sights and sounds of civilization faded. The air grew cooler, heavier, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the thick canopy, casting long shadows that danced just beyond the edge of vision. By dusk, Emma reached the entrance to Forgotten Hollow. A narrow path wound down into the valley, framed by gnarled branches that seemed to twist like skeletal fingers. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl and the faint rustling of leaves. Something about the place unsettled her, but the pull of discovery urged her onward. As she stepped off the path, the forest seemed to close in behind her. The temperature dropped sharply, and a low murmur rose from the depths of the hollow, like whispered voices, indistinct yet unmistakably human. Emma paused, straining to catch the words, but the sounds faded as quickly as they came. Determined to press on, she set up camp near the base of an ancient oak tree, its trunk scarred with strange markings that glowed faintly in the moonlight. That night, as Emma lay in her tent, the whispers returned, now clearer, more insistent. They seemed to call her name, softly at first, then growing louder, as if beckoning her to follow deeper into the shadows. Sleep eluded her. The boundary between waking and dreaming blurred as the voices wove through her thoughts. What secrets did Forgotten Hollow guard? And who or what was calling out to her from the darkness? The morning light filtered weakly through the dense canopy, casting the hollow in a pale, greenish hue. Emma rose from her restless sleep, the memory of the whispered voices still lingering in her mind, like a half-forgotten dream. The forest around her felt different now, alive in a way that went beyond the rustling of leaves or the chirping of birds. It was as if the very earth beneath her feet breathed with hidden intent. She packed her gear with deliberate care, her eyes drawn once more to the ancient oak tree whose markings seemed to pulse faintly, as though holding some secret power. The symbols were unlike anything she had seen before, swirling patterns that appeared almost fluid, shifting subtly when viewed from the corner of her eye. With cautious steps, Emma followed a barely visible trail leading deeper into the hollow. The undergrowth thickened, twisting into thorny tangles that snagged her clothes and scratched her skin. The air grew colder still, carrying that strange murmur on the wind, a chorus of whispers threading through the branches. As she pressed forward, the whispers grew clearer. Not just indistinct voices anymore, but words, broken phrases that floated just beyond understanding. "Help us. Don't trust the light. They're coming." Emma's heart quickened. Were these echoes from the past, or warnings from something still watching, still waiting? Suddenly, the forest opened into a small clearing, and Emma froze. In the center stood a weathered stone altar, covered in moss and carved with the same symbols she had seen on the oak tree. Around it lay scattered bones, some small and brittle, others larger and more recent. A chill ran down her spine. The whispers seemed to swirl around the altar, a low hum rising to a haunting crescendo. Emma's eyes darted to the shadows beyond the clearing, where twisted shapes moved just out of sight. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. Instinct screamed at her to run, but something deeper compelled her to stay, to understand. She stepped closer, reaching out to touch the cold stone. The moment her fingers brushed the surface, a sudden flash of images erupted behind her eyelids, flickering scenes of a long-forgotten ritual, figures cloaked in darkness chanting around the altar, voices rising in desperate plea. Emma stumbled back, breathless. The whispers transformed into a voice, clear, urgent, and filled with sorrow. Find the truth. Break the silence. The hollow seemed to pulse with life, shadows stretching and twisting, the very forest whispering its secrets. Emma knew that what lay ahead was far beyond any story she had ever heard, and that the forgotten hollow held horrors and truths she could scarcely imagine. Emma's breath caught in her throat as the voice faded into the cold air. The clearing seemed to hold its breath with her, as if the forest itself waited for her next move. She glanced around, heart pounding, but no figures stood in the shadows, only the eerie silence that pressed in on all sides. She told herself it was just her mind playing tricks, the isolation bending reality, yet the unmistakable feeling of being watched settled over her like a shroud. Pushing forward, Emma circled the altar, studying the symbols once more. The carvings seemed to shimmer faintly, as if reacting to her presence. She traced one spiral with her fingertip, and a sudden chill shot through her arm. That's when she heard it, a faint, snapping sound from just beyond the trees. She spun toward the noise, eyes scanning the dense foliage. Movement flickered, a glimpse of pale skin, a flash of something watching her from the shadows. But when she took a step forward, the figure vanished. Emma swallowed hard. She wasn't alone. "Who's there?" she called out, voice trembling. The only answer was the whispering wind. Memories of the warnings flickered in her mind. Don't trust the light. They're coming. She needed to keep calm, to think clearly. Her grandfather's journal, tucked safely in her pack, might hold clues about the hollow's dark past. She pulled it out and flipped to a brittle, yellowed page titled The Watchers. According to the notes, the Watchers were ancient guardians of the hollow, beings neither fully human nor spirit, bound to protect a terrible secret buried deep beneath the earth. Legends claimed they could appear and disappear at will, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Emma's fingers trembled as she read on, the weight of her discovery settling heavy on her chest. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the clearing, carrying with it a whisper so close she could have sworn it brushed her ear. "Leave, before it's too late." She looked up, heart hammering, but saw nothing but the swaying branches. The sun was setting and shadows thickened, pooling like ink. Emma made a decision. She would press onward, if only to uncover what had trapped these restless souls, and why the hollow whispered their names across the ages. Yet, as she ventured deeper, every step seemed to echo with unseen eyes tracking her passage. The forgotten hollow was awakening, and it was watching. The forest floor beneath Emma's boots softened, the moss giving way to patches of bare earth and tangled roots. The path narrowed further, winding down into a shallow ravine where the trees grew twisted and gnarled, their branches arching like the ribs of some long-dead beast. The air was thick with a damp, earthy smell, mingled with something else, faintly metallic, like rusted iron. Emma's pulse quickened. According to her grandfather's journal, the ravine was the site of the old Hollowell mine, long abandoned after a series of strange accidents and disappearances decades ago. The locals whispered that those lost were never really gone, their spirits trapped beneath the soil. As twilight faded into darkness, Emma pulled out her flashlight and shone its beam into the gloom ahead. The path led to a rusted gate, half buried in brambles, guarding the yawning entrance of a mine shaft, black as an open wound. She hesitated, the voice from before echoing in her mind. Leave, before it's too late. But the pull of discovery was too strong. Steeling herself, Emma squeezed through the gate and stepped inside. The beam of her flashlight cut through the thick darkness, revealing wooden beams bowed with age and walls slick with moisture. The air was stale, heavy with the weight of forgotten time. As she moved deeper, the whispers returned, faint, barely audible at first, then growing louder, as though the mine itself breathed with restless spirits. The voices were fragmented, pleading, angry, warning. Suddenly the ground beneath her feet gave a sickening crack. Emma stumbled, catching herself just in time, before plunging into the shadows below. Heart pounding, she looked down into a narrow pit. At the bottom lay a tangle of bones, broken tools, and scraps of tattered clothing. The realization struck her like a blow. These were the remains of those who had vanished here, trapped forever beneath the earth. A cold breath brushed against her neck. She spun around, flashlight beams slicing through the dark, but nothing stirred. The whispers crescendoed, merging into a chorus of desperate voices. Help us. Set us free. Beware the Hollow's curse. Emma's hands trembled as she reached for the journal. If she was to survive the night, to uncover the truth, she would have to piece together the history of the Hollowell mine and face whatever darkness had been buried here long ago. Emma's fingers brushed the fragile pages of the journal as she sat on a fallen beam inside the mine's mouth. Her flashlight cast trembling shadows on the damp walls as she read the entries her grandfather had carefully preserved. The Hollowell mine wasn't just an abandoned shaft. It was a place stained by tragedy and ancient malice. Decades ago, the mine had been a bustling hub, promising wealth and prosperity to the small town nearby. But the fortune seekers had uncovered something they shouldn't have. A buried altar beneath the earth, similar to the one she had found in the clearing. According to the journal, miners had disturbed the altar during excavation, awakening a terrible force bound to the land. Strange accidents began to happen. Tools vanished, eerie voices echoed through the tunnels, and shadows moved on their own. One by one, workers disappeared without a trace, swallowed by the mine's growing darkness. Local elders whispered of a curse, the restless spirits of those bound to the altar, trapped between worlds, desperate to be freed, but also desperate to keep their secret hidden. The Watchers, as the journal called them, were said to be guardians of this curse, neither friend nor foe, enforcing the Hollow's silence. Emma swallowed hard as the pieces fell into place. the whispers, the glowing symbols, the restless presence. It was all tied to this curse. Suddenly, the mind trembled, a low rumble vibrating through the walls. Dust rained from the ceiling, and a cold wind swept through the shaft, carrying the faint scent of decay. The whispers rose again, urgent and insistent. Break the silence. Free us, or join us. Emma's heart pounded. She realized that uncovering the truth was no longer a matter of curiosity. It was a race against time. The forest outside was no longer just a place of shadows. It was a prison, a warning, and a trap. Emma stood at the edge of the mine shaft, her breath misting in the cold air as the weight of the curse pressed down on her. The whispers swirled like a storm inside her mind, voices pleading and warning, begging for release or threatening doom. She flipped open her grandfather's journal to the last entry, written in a hurried, almost frantic hand. It told of a ritual, one that could either break the curse or bind it forever. But the ritual came with a price, a sacrifice, a soul to be given in exchange for the hollow's silence. Her eyes flicked back to the altar in the clearing, the carvings glowing faintly in the darkness. Emma realized with a jolt that the hollow itself was alive, aware, and demanding repayment for its secrets. Suddenly, the shadows around her coalesced, shapes materializing from the darkness, figures cloaked in mist, eyes glowing with an unearthly light. The Watchers had come. They circled her slowly, their whispers a haunting melody. You have awoken what was meant to sleep, one voice intoned, deep and echoing. Emma's heart raced. She had a choice: flee and risk the curse spreading beyond the hollow, or confront the darkness and risk becoming part of the legend herself. With trembling hands, she closed the journal and stepped toward the altar, determined to face whatever fate awaited. The hollow's whispers grew louder, merging into a deafening chorus. Whispers from the forgotten, echoes in the dark. The hollow remembers, and so must you. Emma's journey was only beginning. The figures that surrounded Emma shimmered, their forms flickering between solid and spectral. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the air thickening with an ancient power. The altar's symbols pulsed in rhythm with the whispers, casting eerie shadows that danced like phantoms on the moss-covered ground. Emma's voice barely steadied as she spoke. What do you want from me? The deepest watcher stepped forward, its eyes glowing like molten silver. Balance must be restored. The hollow's silence shattered, and the curse festers. She glanced down at the journal in her hands, remembering the ritual's instructions, the incantation, the offerings, the final sacrifice. Fear churned inside her, but so did determination. I will do what is necessary, Emma said, her voice echoing in the stillness. The watchers bowed their heads in acknowledgement. The whispers crescendoed into a haunting melody as Emma began to chant the words written long ago, her voice trembling but growing stronger. The ground beneath the altar trembled, and the symbols flared bright blue, illuminating the hollow in a ghostly glow. Shadows twisted and writhed, coalescing into the shape of a figure, a woman, bound and broken, her eyes full of sorrow and rage. Emma's heart ached with a strange familiarity. This was the source of the curse, the spirit trapped by betrayal and dark magic, desperate for freedom. The watchers encircled the apparition, their voices joining Emma's chant in a powerful chorus. With a final, echoing cry, the figure dissolved into a cascade of shimmering light, and the hollow fell silent. Emma sank to her knees, the weight of what she had witnessed pressing on her soul. The whispers had faded, but the hollow's secrets would never truly be forgotten. She had broken the silence, but at what cost? The forest was quiet now. Emma rose slowly from the altar, the cold air no longer heavy with whispers, but instead filled with a fragile stillness, like the calm after a storm. The faint glow from the carved symbols had faded, leaving the clearing bathed only in the pale light of the rising moon. Her body ached, but her mind was sharp. The curse was lifted, or so it seemed. The spirits trapped beneath the earth were finally freed, their voices hushed by the ritual's power. Yet, as she looked around, Emma felt a strange emptiness in the hollow, a void where the restless energy once thrummed. It was as if the forest itself mourned the loss of its secret heartbeat. The journal in her hand seemed heavier now, its pages filled with knowledge that could both save and destroy. She knew the story wouldn't end here. The hollow's whispers might be silent for now, but its shadow would linger in the hearts of those who dared to listen. Emma took a deep breath, the crisp night air filling her lungs. Her grandfather's words echoed softly in her mind. Some places remember us, long after we forget them. With a final glance at the clearing, Emma turned away, stepping back onto the path that led out of the forgotten hollow. The forest seemed to watch her leave, the shadows folding back into themselves like a closing book. But somewhere, deep beneath the earth, a whisper stirred, faint, distant, and waiting. The hollow remembered, and so would she. The days that followed felt surreal to Emma. The town around her carried on as if nothing had changed, but she knew better. The hollow's secrets had marked her, a silent pact forged in shadow and silence. She tried to return to normal life, but the memories haunted her. The glowing symbols, the whispers, the spectral watchers. At night, her dreams were filled with fragments of the ritual, the sorrowful spirit's eyes, and the echo of that final plea, "Remember us." Her grandfather's journal remained close, a link to the past and a warning for the future. Emma studied it obsessively, searching for answers she might have missed, clues that could explain the hollow's true nature. One passage caught her attention. The hollow is not merely a place, but a gate, a boundary between worlds. When silence falls, the veil grows thin. Beware the whispers that follow. Emma shivered. The hollow's curse might be broken, but the door it guarded was still open. On restless nights, she found herself drawn back to the edge of the forest, staring into the darkness, where shadows twisted and breathed. Sometimes, just beyond the trees, she thought she saw figures watching, waiting. The whispers might have ceased, but the story was far from over, for some secrets refuse to stay buried, and some voices never truly fade away. The nights grew colder, and the wind carried a new chill, one that wasn't just from the changing seasons. Emma could feel it in her bones. The hollow was watching still, waiting for the right moment to speak again. She found herself returning to the clearing once more, drawn by an invisible thread that tugged at her soul. The altar stood silent, the carvings faded but still alive with an unspoken power. In the stillness, Emma heard a whisper, soft, distant, like the breath of the forest itself. we are not gone. Her heart quickened. The spirits she had freed were not at rest, but transformed. The Hollow's promise was not one of peace, but of eternal vigilance. As dawn broke, Emma made a silent vow. She would guard the Hollow's secret, protect the boundary between worlds, and listen to the whispers. Not as a curse, but as a calling. For in the Forgotten Hollow, some things never die. They only wait. Emma felt the weight of her decision settle deep within her. The Hollow had chosen her, not merely as a witness, but as its guardian. The voices that once threatened now felt like a solemn charge, a responsibility passed down through generations. Her life shifted subtly. The town's busy streets seemed distant, and the quiet forest became her refuge and her prison. She would visit the clearing regularly, tracing the faded symbols and listening for the faintest murmurs carried on the breeze. The journal, now worn from constant use, held more than just stories. It was a manual, a guide to understanding the thin veil between the living and the forgotten. Sometimes, when the moon was high and the wind whispered just right, Emma heard the watchers' voices again, not as threats, but as warnings and guidance. Protect the balance, keep the silence, remember the forgotten. Her nights were no longer haunted by fear, but by purpose. Emma was no longer just a visitor to the Hollow. She was its keeper, and the Hollow in turn was alive in her, a living memory of shadows and whispers that would never fade. Years passed, and Emma became a legend herself, the keeper of the Forgotten Hollow. The town whispered of her strange connection to the forest, but no one dared follow her footsteps deep into the trees. The altar remained, hidden beneath moss and time, its secrets safe for now. The Hollow no longer screamed in restless whispers, but it never truly slept. Emma often stood in the clearing at dusk, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath her feet. She knew the Hollow was patient, waiting, watching, alive, in silence. Sometimes, when the wind shifted just so, she could hear a single whisper carried on the breeze. "Remember us." And she would answer softly, "I remember." The Hollow's story was endless, an eternal whisper between worlds, forever etched in the shadows. And so the forgotten were never truly lost. They lived on in whispers, in memories, and in the heart of the Hollow.